I am super excited to be part of this session, especially given recent announcements on generative AI, ChatGPT, and other. And so we'll get into that shortly. But I'm Larry Godec. I am a distinguished Avasant Fellow, unlike the undistinguished ones, I guess. But I'm also the former Chief Information Officer for First American, global Fortune 500 financial services company and title insurance company. And in the last few years before I retired, I was really focused on emerging technologies, including blockchain, RPI, AI, and data scientists. So, deep background. So let me set the stage for what we're going to talk about. Everybody knows what AI is, but what is Web3? And how does that interact with artificial intelligence? So let's talk about Web3. We really need to go back to the beginning. So Web 1 was a static, one-way exchange of information. Web 2, we moved to the dynamic, interactive, and personal experience, where a few central content providers, and we all know who they are, have amassed fortunes by monetizing their users' content and personal information. So Web 3 has the ability to decentralize the web and put users back in control of their own personal information and other assets. It's based on blockchain and decentralized systems. So Web3 is the next generation of the World Wide Web. It aims to make data more interconnected, intelligent, and understandable by machines. So artificial intelligence can analyze the vast amount of data that will be generated on Web3. And Web3 and AI can work together to create a more intellectual and decentralized web experience. So we're going to dive into that. But now let's meet the expert panelists, and I will let them introduce themselves. They'll do a much better job than I will. And any opening comments?
Yeah, so I'll just quickly introduce Mukund, Kalmanker. It's been the most exciting space that I work in. So all about AI. I led the Wipro AI team, and as you can imagine, it's the most exciting time that I have. I mean, I work very closely with our customers. I work with their consumers, I work with our market units, and then I work with innovation labs and partners. It's crazy out there. But needless to say, if I were to say one thing, yes, this technology is evolving at a very fast pace. It's an exciting journey, and happy to be over here to talk about what we are learning in the industry.
Thank you. I'm Nishit, the Vice President of IT at Marvell Technologies, sometimes also known as Marvell Semiconductors, not to be confused with Marvel Magazine. So this topic is doubly interesting for me because I'm the practitioner or user of these technologies, but Marvell, if you don't know, is the fastest growing large-scale semiconductor company in the world, and we are data infrastructure providers. So we actually enable these technologies. When you talk about edge, machine learning chips, or connectivity or storage, these are things that we enable. So we are doubly excited about the new progress.
Great, thank you. Let's jump into some questions. So what is the framework of Web 3.0, and how does blockchain and generative AI play a part?
So that's a very interesting point, right? When we talk about Web 3, and it's not just Web 3.0 or AI, you're talking about some of the other ones like Metaverse and all of them as well, right? The underpinnings are, you're talking about blockchain, you're talking about AI, NLP, and all of these technologies. And the most interesting part is, you are seeing all of these technologies evolving, right? And you're talking about a convergence of all of these evolutions that are happening at the same time and the opportunities that come, right? So you talk about blockchain, you talk about everything around distribution, you talk about encryption, immutability, you're talking about things like tokenizations and decentralizations and all of that. On the AI, we've been talking about things that have been looks like past now, but you're talking about machine learning and deep learning and NLPs of the world. And then comes in the generative AI, and then now you're also talking about AGI and things like that. So what you're really thinking about is understanding the technology evolutions of these underpinnings. Then comes in some of the assets, right? You're talking about tokens, NFTs, etc., that are getting created. You're talking about content getting generated with, like, the Gen AI technologies. And you're essentially talking about assets that get created and then, you are going to be consuming it. And then you throw in the layer of consumer, right? You're talking about the metaverse, you're talking about the gaming applications, you're talking about the experience that's transforming. So if you were to really think about it, it's like three-layer technologies, the assets that get created for consumption, and the consuming layer itself. So that's like a sort of a framework that gets together when you talk about the convergence of the emerging technologies.
So interestingly, our framework to handle from there starts with the user.
Yeah.
So decentralization requirements, whether it's supply chain or IP or application, is not very uncommon in high-tech semiconductor space. What's new is the requirement to add intelligence to these ecosystems. So it could be insights or it could be cognitive features, right? So as, at least based on the old AI technologies we were talking about earlier, so old AI technologies, the intelligence is normally centralized. You get it out of centralized ecosystem and you render it to your decentralized environments. So you have a requirement of decentralization, but you have to build, or what we are trying to do is build a semantic web within the enterprise to basically collect the information and feed through the required intelligence back. One easy example would be forecast to response. So we collaborate with our customers. Semiconductor has long lead time. Everybody remembers last year you can't buy a car, so because we couldn't produce the chips on time. So what we do is we try to linearize their backlog and actually explain them back how their demand should be. So we can have a good collaboration. So it requires intelligence to be fed back. So what we do is we use, I would say, blockchain-inspired architectures, but more enterprise, like Snowflake or Umi, and you basically build the semantic web. Now what your consideration, again going backwards, is security and compliance. So you have to build that layer on top of it, and ultimately you have built all of this, so you have to monitor what you've built. So
well, that's a great segue into my next question. So how do we ensure that Web 3.0 is secure and accurate? And is the technology, the underlying technology, really ready for prime time?
Yeah, so I think two parts to your question, right? I think one is we're talking about security and then the accuracy side of the world. The other is whether it's prime time, and there are differing opinions over there. But getting to security, if you really talk about, again, getting back to the basics, right? You're talking about blockchain. You're talking about the whole philosophy where you are moving from centralized structures to putting the power in the hands of the users. You are really talking about the central power getting decentralized, but at the same time, you are talking about a lot of trust in the way it's decentralized. And if you really think about it, the moment you talk about trust, you're talking about higher levels of accuracy. So yes, you have blockchain on one side, which is essentially talking about a higher trust, a higher security, and how it's going to be distributed across the networks. The other side is the AI side. Now there are questions over there, right? So it's evolving very fast. As you rightly said, I mean, while the world was just talking about AI, now you're already referring to as old AI, and you are to the next level, right? So the whole philosophy is, yes, there are models out over there. Questions are around, is this really accurate? Is this something that you can rely on? There are certain industries which are regulated that we just heard, in the health session. So I think it's the question of making sure that you have the right approaches in place in order to consume some of these evolutions of technologies. That's one part. Coming to your prime time, I think these technologies are still evolving. So obviously there are leaders who are adopting these technologies. But at the same time, on the blockchain side, if you look at it, it's out over there. There are so many use cases. There are so many uses of it that are there. You talk about health, you talk about real estate, you talk about financial services. You talk about so many use cases on the AI side. But it's on blockchain, I would say it's still in the process of adoption. On the AI side, I don't know whether what you call it as prime time. It's everywhere. You just can't ignore it. That's what it is. But there are parts of AI which have been in the market for a while, which are something that's getting already adopted. Where are you talking about the newer concepts like Gen AI, Chat GPT, and a host of other things which are sort of getting adopted. And then you have some of the newer ones that are on the horizon, artificial general intelligence, and so on and so forth. So we've got to be ready for it.
Well, you mentioned something that I just want to touch on. I'll turn it over to you. And that is use cases. And the one advice that I can give all of you as it pertains to blockchain It's easy just to spin up a blockchain just to say you did it. And while that's interesting and it's good to learn, it's all about the use cases, because there's a lot of bad use cases for blockchain, and there's a few really good use cases. So my advice is to really focus on business use cases and then let the technology help you build that.
So I'll talk about the accuracy portion of it. Now, many of you who have used ML models in the past know 80% is actually pretty good accuracy, right? Now tell that to your payroll partner. Tell that to an employee that your paycheck is 80% accurate. So it's where you use it. I'm clearly not going to use it for revenue accounting, let's say, right? But there are places that we have very good use for, and we have started to deploy it. The previous panel talked about autonomous coding. We call it basically a digital assistant for a programmer. So that's a good use case where you can be nearly accurate, but don't have to be 100% because there's a person working in tandem with you. One other place at enterprise level, which is of huge interest to us, is enterprise content management. So yesterday people talked about fragmentation of applications, right? So you have too many applications, and all for good reasons. Now, where do you find your content? So enterprise content management has been there forever, but like many of you know, it doesn't truly work because you have to provide the metadata, and then it's after that you have to keep maintaining it. So there are a lot of newer technologies coming in, a lot of big brands also getting into this, and they have made some presentations to us. We're really looking into it. Is how do you do moving away from traditional page ranking or metadata-based enterprise content management to something which can actually crawl the ecosystem within your landscape and then deliver the content to you.
Okay, so what do you say we spice things up? Let's talk about ChatGPT and the dark side of that. And if you haven't seen it, go out and Google it. But Jeffrey Hinton, who's basically the godfather of AI, just quit Google. And he did that because he was concerned, like a lot of others, like Elon, about the potential of the dark side or bad actors getting a hold of GPT, and using that for bad things, and killing all of us and wiping out humanity. So we know that GPT can't keep a secret. Just ask Samsung and other companies that mistakenly put their trade secrets on it and then saw them disappear. And we know that it can build fake songs, fake interviews, and hallucinate and do all kinds of horrible things. So why don't you all touch on how do we caution as we roll this out our companies?
Yeah, it's interesting when we start using the terms like hallucinations and in context of models, engineering, technology. But yeah, that is true. I mean, it's a reality. And when you start talking about dark side, I think every technology has its pros and cons. It has its good and its bad. But there's something unique about what we are talking in today's world. It's far more important because the pace at which the technology is evolving, the pace at which it is learning, and the pace at which it's becoming real, that's a little mind-boggling, right? This is where, I refer to a lot of things which are more about responsible adoption of AI, right? And the moment you club it along with technologies like Web3 and then put it into the metaverses of the world, it's a completely different game. So the responsible AI piece of the puzzle, where you are talking about adoption of technologies in a responsible manner, it becomes very important. Whether we talk about solution providers like us who create solutions where you have responsible frameworks brought in, whether you're talking about enterprises on deciding where to use, where not to use. But the bigger portion is how are the governments themselves adopting, right? I mean, this is probably the first time where we are wanting the government to do a lot more, the regulatory bodies to do a lot more, the surveillance bodies to do a lot more. And it's just because there's quite a bit of anxiety, quite a bit of fear that this can potentially go rogue. If not go rogue, it can fall in bad hands. And at the end of the day, the government has to step in to say that, yes, we've got to ensure that the good side of the technology evolution benefits the human life and it doesn't create an impact. So that's the dark side thing, if you were to. But yes, there are real concerns. I'm not sure you can pause it. This is something that's, that's a train, that's a moving train. I don't think it can apply brakes as well. but it's more about quickly embracing, some of the frameworks that can make it a lot more responsible.
Yeah, at this point, I think for technology leaders like us, this is probably the most important or critical question, right? So earlier, we used to be the source of these, platforms and technologies which were released to the business community or to the end users. Now we are democratized AI. So there are some, there's some challenges like any democracy has in this particular case, right? So the policies and procedures, your ethical concerns, right? So can your organization deal with the ethics and compliance concern that comes out with it? So that's an active engagement that we are trying to get into. Like the old AI, what we used to do is we used to have every big decision where we are, let's say, having cognitive bots. That's like the most common case in enterprise. We'll talk to our auditors and say, this is what you're doing. Do you approve? Do you not approve? Who's the owner? Is business the owner? Is IT the owner? Are my data scientist owners, right? So you have those roles, responsibilities, organizational structures defined. And we have a certain level of control. Like we decided not to do SOX processes on AI because it was hard to audit it back. Now you cannot have that level of control. Like I said, it's democratized. So as an organization, what we are trying to figure out, along with our partners and our web of similar organizations, is what is our policy? Because if you restrict it, so like many companies are just switched off. You can't access ChatGPT, but you do still have your cell phone, so you can still do it. So the issue, like you said, is not just about generating beautiful emails, but if you're writing a code, are you infringing on somebody's IP? We are very IP-heavy sector. Most of them are, but tech is, right? And if you have ever been deposed, or if you've ever deposed, it's actually pretty strict. The framework in US about IP infringement is very strict. So at a company level, if you are accessing a code which you use in your module, how do you know that it's not an IP infringement? How does a person, another TV, let's say, an engineer working on the modern TV knows they're not using Samsung's QLED IP because that doesn't come with a disclaimer, right? So at an organization level, those policies have to be defined. But the key thing you mentioned, and it's very critical, is government has to catch up. Because now the question that I have in return is, are the IP and infringement rules right? Is the coding the right level to have your IP infringement laws enforced? Or maybe the architecture, or maybe the idea, right? Somebody from OpenAI said English is the most dynamic programming language now. So when you have such a thing, idea is your IP, right? So at a macro level, at geopolitical level, these things have to be defined. And then you have these cases where multiple organizations are going to compete. We saw a very clear case of large companies, I won't name them, they are my customers. So large companies used to put brakes on AI. There were previous examples of it. And here comes OpenAI. Now everybody has unleashed the monster because there's a competition going on here, right? So at a government level, those policies have to come in sooner than later. Like you said, they used to be ahead of the curve earlier. All of us have dealt with privacy and all those compliance requirements. But I think this time they might be a little behind.
Well, my personal opinion is that generative AI is the most disruptive technology since the internet. So all of us, technologists, are going to play obviously a key role in how that moves forward. And I've heard comments around, and I know there's startups that ChatGPT can actually now finish coding from a developer. And that's interesting to me from a productivity standpoint, certainly. But also, I'm sure the developer or programmer is going to say, well, I wouldn't have coded it that way. Well, but maybe you should have coded it that way. And did the ChatGPT create a bug? Did it fix a bug? Did the programmer create a bug? So there's going to be interesting dynamics in play in all of certainly our IT organizations. But I've also heard experts talk about, well, predictor, generative AT, ChatGPT, it's going to bend jobs, but it shouldn't replace jobs. It'll replace tasks. But then a friend of mine whose cousin had a company, and what they did is they helped college students write entrance exams for law school or med school. Well, guess what? ChatGPT now writes better letters for those candidates. So that company is going out of business. That industry is probably going to go out of business. So I would say hold on, because change is a-coming. But let's get back to Web3 and AI and how they work together. What would you recommend? How do we get started? How would you recommend somebody get started?
So in our case, the starting point is education, because I'll tell you a very old journey we had on robotics process automation that was kind of a way in for my company to get into AI, right? So your use cases, like I said, you have to have the right use cases. And the use cases are going to come from users. Us IT guys will have great technologies that we can provide, but we have to have the right use case fit too. So what we did was we brought in a lot of RPA companies, UiPath or Automation Anywhere, to educate us how that tool is going to get used. Now that again has old AI as of now, but what we did was we then went around. It's not just IT. You have to work with your business on it. Now it's not just that. You have to build your partner ecosystem. So yesterday, quite a few folks talked about single partner ecosystem that we used to have. That's how it used to work, right? You have one large partner, and that'll do. But then now you have to develop a more fragmented partner ecosystem, and then you still have to figure out how you drive the right efficiency of it. So that's what we leveraged in our initial journey on AI. We used our partner ecosystem. They gave us the content. We also were lucky enough to hire the right talent. If you're trying to hire, I would request you to look at universities, because they're actually quite nice. You'll be amazed by the new talent that comes out from there. And then that's where we started our journey.
And I think absolutely right. I think education is where it really starts, right? We need to understand what we are looking at in these technologies. We need to understand what's the impact these technologies are creating on our business. And then sort of draw out a strategic vision saying if these technologies are unstoppable, if these technologies are going to create far more impact on the businesses, on the consumers, then what is that our vision would be and where our starting point starts off. So I think one of the things, typically when I talk to all CXOs and advise them is, started from a point where you have a strategic vision laid out, you have a roadmap laid out, and then you started at a point where it's going to be something that would prove those technologies to be working, and then started in a manner which becomes monetizable as you go through the roadmap. So you take an asset-based approach, create assets which become enterprise assets, which can be used in multiple reusable forms. I think that's going to be the key starting point for all organizations.
Thanks. You mentioned partners, and one of the questions was, well, how do people leverage partners? And clearly, Avasant, there's a whole host of others right outside the doors that I'm sure would love to talk to all of us. Any other thoughts on how to leverage partners? You mentioned hiring people. Clearly, data scientists are at a premium that are worth their weight in gold, and we can't get enough of them fast enough through the college, through the universities. So we're going to have to rely on partners versus building it in-house.
Yes. That's an excellent question. So one sage advice is don't try to do it yourself. So do tap into your ecosystem. Now, being in Bay Area company, there are some advantages because we have a lot of them on our vicinity. What we started doing recently is we started having these kind of technology days in the company where we actually bring in newer technologies and actually have them explain us. Now again, so you have to remember there is a incestuous relationship where we supply chips to them. So it is of that benefit too. So so again, back to education, right? So we use the software providers as partners and we get it. But I think the main place where we are really able to leverage is our service providers. Because what they're seeing is they're seeing the entire ecosystem, they're looking at other companies, and they also bring in a lot of lessons learned to you, right? So these technologies are awesome, they're amazing. What you don't see most of the time when you're dealing with the technology providers is the footnote, right? The asterisks and everything written in font size 2. So that is where your partner comes in. And so the way we started was again where it made sense for us, right? So there, like you mentioned before, you have to have a strategic direction in which you're going to go, right? So automation was or let's say supply chain risk reduction is one of those things which we're going to go after. And there are key niche players, but then what you do is you basically merge them along with your large scale partners. Because cost, everybody's trying to do more for less. So, and then you leverage that ecosystem. So ultimately, the quick answer to that is tap into your partners. Don't limit yourself to one, either ways. But at the same time, do not forget to grow your own team. So you have to know what you want.
Yeah, I think completely agree. I think coming from a partner side, it's a different picture. It's a unique situation, right? I think one of the most important focus areas that we have is how do we sort of take learnings from the industry and provide value to people like you, right? There is quite a bit of institutionalized capability that we have developed in terms of saying that, okay, when we work with multiple clients, we work with help them succeed, create a competitive edge. We also create a framework of learning, which essentially benefits everyone in the industry, and it's helpful for all of our customers. So on one hand, we partner with customers and the consumers directly or indirectly, right? Or on the other hand, we are actually working with technology vendors. Now, whether it's Google, whether it's Microsoft, Amazon, or the number of boutiques that are out over there, what becomes very important for us is to sort of develop solutions, develop accelerators, develop products and platforms and services in such a manner where an ecosystem brings power to those solutions. At the end of the day, we are sitting and trying to help bring the learning. We are trying to solve a business problem. We're trying to create an industry impact. And the question is, when there are so many innovations happening in the industry, how do you create the right ecosystem? How do you curate that ecosystem in order to fit in for the right problems? You're absolutely right. Don't try to create it yourself. There are so many innovations happening. There is so much of money flowing into particularly the technologies that we are talking about today. And it's just a matter of making sure that you have the ability to curate all of this and have it for the right reasons.
So last question. So I've heard that Chat GPT and all of its knowledge that it has access to, by the end of the year, maybe next year, we'll be able to bring it in behind or inside your firewall and integrate your legacy applications and add all of your data to it as well to make real key changes. But that brings the whole question of licensing, subscription. So what are your opinions on how that's all going to get worked out?
Yeah, so again, I'll break your question into two parts, right? One is bringing it into your organization, because that's where the whole world is grappling with. And I always try to sort of simplify this whole generative AI thing that has caught the frenzy of the market, right? One is, of course, you've got a lot of these models which are becoming a lot real, a lot human-like. They've been trained on large data sets. They've become very intelligent. They've become very usable, if I were to call it that way. So there is, of course, when we talk about this generative AI roadmap, the first inflecting point was where you had some of these models now brought in as services through various technology platforms. Now, of course, the second inflecting point is where you are going to be really customizing it, right? Where it's going to be customizable, which basically means that you are probably going to get it domain trained. And when you see the context of domain trained, you're essentially saying that yes, there is a very large language model sitting over there. Now you're bringing it into your organization. You are providing it the ammunition of what's there inside your organization and tailoring it to how you are working with your own clients, how you are having your own market models defined, how you are engaging with your clients. So that's the second inflecting point where it gets inside your organizations. And third, which is probably the most important, because at the end of the day, a lot of organizations are going to grapple with the kind of costs that are going to be associated with all of these things. Training models, adding parameter, this is not inexpensive, that's expensive. So there's going to be quite a bit of effort that's going to go around the engineering side where you're going to start optimizing the hardware. So that's sort of a thing that you talk about when you're getting it behind. But then the question comes in terms of saying that, okay, what are going to be the models that are going to come in the industry? Now, of course, the comparisons of technologies, what to choose, those frameworks, I would imagine, most of the people have already started working on it. We already have started looking at technologies, drawing comparisons, which to use when, and I think there's quite a bit of progress in that. But the models in terms of subscriptions, the models in terms of enterprise licenses, The models in terms of, what we used to in our earlier world called as long tail models and all that, all those are going to continue evolving. At this point in time, it's more subscription. In the hands of few, what's going to happen is it's also going to be used by a number of other players, and then you're going to have subscription on top of subscriptions, or you're going to be talking about enterprise licenses that can be leveraged, and that's an area that we got to watch out. So you would potentially not lock yourself right now, you would potentially devise a strategy, whereas the technology evolutions get into the market, we are geared up in order to adapt. One of the pitfalls, right? If you lock yourself in, then some of the evolutions that would come in, you might probably miss out on it. So one advice I always give when we're talking about contracts is keep the flexibility in your hands. That way you would be in a position to be agile, you will be in a position to be responsive, and you'll be able to respond to the changes in technologies itself.
Good point. So I knew this was going to happen because we're running really short on time. And of course, we didn't get to what are all the tools available for you to go look at. What about change management? You've got DevOps, you've got SecOps, you've got FinOps for the cloud spend. Are we going to need an AI ops? My guess is the answer to that is yes. So I'll end there and I'll let the panelists wrap it up with their final thoughts.
Good. Yeah, so everything you said. Change management, that is, it's a new type of change management. It's not about training, it's not about, showing the user screens and getting feedback. You're talking about educating people on what random forest is. Try doing that to an accountant, right? So that is a new level of change management. You have to look at organizationally at everything, because it is disruptive, and you have to be ahead of it, and it's going to eventually be a competitive advantage for a company, right? So we call about supply chain being a competitive advantage. Supply chain is leveraging AI at a fast pace, so that's feeding into your competitive advantage. So, but the parting thought here is, I would say, as a downer, I'm a technology guy, I'm optimistic about it, but the parting thought here is security, compliance, and policies.
Yeah, I think, the technology is evolving, it's fast evolving. I think there is, I always say, it's not just optimism that it will produce a lot of good for all of us as humans, but it's more about tracking it. It's unstoppable. It's something that you've got to embrace. What you need to do is prepare yourself for the change that follows once you embrace this technology, right? So it's very important for all of the organizations to start evaluating the impact of all of these evolving technologies. You talk Web 3.0, you talk AI, you talk about metaverse and all of it. You've got to lay out a vision in terms of saying, how do I embrace these technologies? How do I manage the change? How do I draw a roadmap that sort of responds to evolving regulations? Because that's another area that we've got to think about. Italy brought in a pause and it's just removed the pause. So these are some of the things that we are going to see given the fast pace of the evolution of these technologies. So I think drawing out the right roadmap, tying it into your business vision, making sure that you have the right frameworks for adoption, making sure you are geared up for the change, and your workforce, your organization is geared up for that change, probably are going to be it's going to be the way to go.
Right. Well, thank you very much to my two panelists, and hopefully we gave all of you something to think about and something to take back to your organizations to be successful. So thank you very much.